Curt Stager has been watching Lower St. Regis Lake every day lately, just like he does every year. He writes down in a notebook exactly when the lake freezes over, shoreline to shoreline. So now he has decades of that data. And sure enough, it shows a shifting climate. He says in this era of climate change, it's more important than ever for us to pay attention and document the changes in our backyards. That's today's story of the day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Morja Wealth Management, serving the North Country for 3 generations. MorjaWM.com. Securities offered through Hightower Securities, LLC, member FINRA, SIPC. Hightower is an SEC-registered investment advisor.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Tuesday, December 17th. First up, President-elect Donald Trump has promised to deport thousands of undocumented immigrants who are living and working in the U.S. after he takes office next month. That could disrupt farms across New York and in the North Country. It's estimated a couple thousand, mostly Mexican and Central American immigrants work on New York State dairy farms. An ag workforce program at Cornell is hosting meetings to help farmers and businesses prepare. Catherine Wheeler has more.
Farmers are always worried about the future. Will it be a good crop year? What's the weather going to be like? And how will the economy change? But next year, another worry is coming for their businesses: increased immigration enforcement and potentially the deportation of thousands of undocumented immigrants, many of whom work on farms.
The incoming Trump administration is messaging about this a lot, and there's no reason not to take them at their word.
That's Richard Stepp. He's the director of Cornell Agricultural Workforce Development.
People are definitely concerned, but I would emphasize that we are in a period of uncertainty. We really don't know. We don't know what exactly the enforcement is going to look like. We don't know how quickly it's going to change.
That's why Stepp and his team are hosting events for farm business owners so they can figure out how to best prepare for the unknown. Stepp says there are a few ways the Trump administration enforcement could take shape. They could focus on border crossing enforcement. They could concentrate on identifying individuals who aren't authorized to work in the U.S.
They can also focus enforcement on the employers who may hire people who are not authorized to work. So from an employer standpoint, what is it that you need to do in order to make sure that the employees you are hiring are authorized to work?
Stepp says they'll talk about what happens if the government takes an enforcement action. He says a lot of times that means the feds will send employers a letter asking them to confirm their workers' legal status.
That's by far the most common thing. And then the next thing is an ICE raid, which, that's the most impactful, most scary thing.
During the first Trump administration, farmers in New York reported the feds arresting individual workers, but nothing large scale. And in 2021, the Biden administration stopped workplace ICE raids. But the rhetoric and possibility still frightens farm employers and their immigrant workers, even if they are here legally. Stepp says this kind of immigration policy could devastate the agriculture industry. The National Center for Farm Worker Health estimates that 70% of ag workers were not born in the U.S.
We all want locally produced agriculture, and we know that if we hurt the workforce on those farms, then we hurt the farms, and the farms won't be able to operate without a viable workforce in place. I can't imagine that the Trump administration wants to really harm employers and really harm agriculture.
Stepp says he hopes that lawmakers can focus on reforming the immigration system, including a visa for dairy farm employees who work year-round. Cornell Agricultural Workforce Development is hosting 2 online sessions on December 17th and 18th. Catherine Wheeler, North Country Public Radio.
Last Friday, an annual sign of the changing seasons happened. Lower St. Regis Lake near Paul Smith's froze completely for the first time this winter. For nearly 40 years, Paul Smith's College professor and climate scientist Curt Stager has been documenting that freeze-up. For our ongoing series on climate change, Emily Russell spoke with Stager about what decades of lake ice data tells us and why this kind of local climate science matters.
So in this case, for this year, I had a little bit of a dilemma because it froze almost all the way across. You'd say like it was 90% frozen, but there were some little open areas out there, so I was torn. So in that case, what you just do is write it all down. So I have a diary with the notes and I say it was 90% frozen. If you want to call that frozen, go ahead. It opened up the next day. Then days later, it froze over. I write that down, and then it opened up again. And this is the third time that it's hardened up. So there's nothing wrong with taking those notes, and someone wants to do the analyses later, they have all of that to work with.
So you've been tracking this data, the first freeze on St. Regis Lake. We're looking at the data right now. It's not an obvious trend. It's not like the lake is freezing later and later every single year because of climate change. So what is happening, and what does this data tell us?
Yeah. So anybody who's spent a lot of time in the Adirondacks knows that our weather is really variable, and I'd put that into our winters are really variable from year to year as well. So you need year after year of data to find a reliable trend. If you just, did it this year and then next year you find, a different kind of a winter, you might think, oh my gosh, it's changing so dramatically. Now you got to wait like 10, 20, 30 years to really see a pattern. The problem in this case with the freeze up is the winters themselves seem to have been becoming more variable as well. And so the more ups and downs there are in the timing of freeze up, the longer you got to wait for a reliable pattern to emerge. It's just more and more confusing, basically, for the statistics. So what we see here is there is a general pattern of the lake freezing later, but because the numbers are so variable from year to year, the statistics tell you not to trust it yet. But it's consistent with what we're seeing across the Northern Hemisphere, where a lot of lakes are absolutely freezing later. And we're also seeing the lake thaw earlier in the spring.
What isn't captured by this kind of data?
The big picture is the world is getting warmer. Higher latitudes like us closer to the pole are actually warming faster than the global average. So long-term picture, we're absolutely going to see the shrinking of winter continue at both ends. It's going to start later, end earlier, and be milder and less reliable. So that's the big picture. The short-term thing, again, you can't really always tell exactly what's going to happen next year with the ice, right? So you got to think long-term on it. But it's part of that pattern that we also see with things like the Winter Carnival and the Ice Palace here in Saranac Lake, where the last two winters, we've almost had the Ice Palace melt before our eyes during the Winter Carnival or even before the Winter Carnival. So we can see that. There's some practical things that we can't necessarily see in these data here with just writing down when the lake freezes. And one of the things to keep in mind as this trend continues is it's not showing how thick the ice is. So if you're going out there for ice fishing or the skating, if it's clean, or just crossing the lake, it really pays to be extra careful from here on out. Ice that used to be safe for your snowmobile or your skis or whatever it was may or may not be, especially if it's in moving water, like anywhere there's a river nearby or something like that. So that's one thing that we can't really tell from a record like this.
Why do you think it's so valuable to collect this kind of really local data where you are?
There are a lot of good reasons to keep track of something like this where you live and to pay attention to your local data. One of them is it helps you get to know the place you live better, and it gives you a personal connection to it. In the case of the ice, it has direct impacts on our community and our lifestyle, like we said, with the ice fishing and crossing the ice and things like that. And so for someone like me, who really respects science and wants other people to do that too, when a lot of climate science has been so heavily politicized, it's really, really hard to argue with information from where you live that you can see for yourself. And in the case of ice, you can see places where there used to be ice shanty villages on Lake Champlain that aren't there anymore. And so whatever your political persuasion might be, you face those kinds of facts when they have to do with where you live.
That was Paul Smith College professor Curt Stager speaking with Emily Russell. Our climate change series is made possible through the generous support of Margot and John Ernst. You can find all the stories in the series at ncpr.org/climate. Music today by Evan Veenstra of Gananoque and Raphael Weinrith Brown of Ottawa. both Ontarioians. I'm David Summerstein.